Then we have the Russian question, which is pretty much where we left it last week. Just that we now have Gorbachev shooting his mouth off again. Gorbachev, during the 1980s, I guess, became suspect of being an agent of influence of the Western imperialists, and now the suspicions are getting more and more dense around Gorbachev. He's now attacking Putin, saying that Putin's mockery of the, I would say, rather pompous pro-democracy forces, the new white army, this time not with Denikin, Kolchak, and Frangel, but now with Prokhorov. We're told that these people they deserve more respect, says Gorbachev. You can't treat them in this way. We'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So in Russia, Gorbachev shooting his mouth off against Putin. Anything endorsed by Gorbachev, of course, he is highly hated inside Russia. This is the kiss of death for the opposition, the golden youth, right? The internet-savvy, Twitter, Facebook, young dupes and narcissist or nihilist, whatever they're going to be. That's what they're fielding against Putin. There will be an attempt tomorrow on the 24th of December, as this program is broadcast, to have another one of these demonstrations. That will be interesting to see what they're capable of. And we're now entering really a period of 2.5 months, or almost 2.5 months, of window of opportunity for NATO intelligence vis-a-vis Russia. What can they get going? The presidential contest, I believe, is March 4th. So by that time, the election season will be over. And we see now that elections, essentially, for the NATO and the CIA, mean the chance for color revolutions, because if you win the election, then you win, but if you lose the election, you claim vote fraud and try to destabilize the country like that. So that's Russia. Now, just in general, it's clear that Obama is lifting and shifting away from the Arab world to some extent, or at least adding, maybe not turning anything away, but adding a new front, which is now going to be China and Asia, the desire to interfere, to meddle, to get something going with the South China Sea, to play Vietnam and the Philippines against Vietnam, the Philippines, and Taiwan against mainland China, and so on, right? All of these things very much on the agenda, as we can hear from the chatter of the various think tanks here in Washington, D.C. Now let's shift to domestic economics and domestic politics. We've had this idiotic confrontation about the payroll tax cut, and I would have to say Obama deserves the medal. He deserves the Nobel Prize for hypocrisy and manipulation, because what he's been able to do is to con the entire Democratic Party, really, and their hangers-on, the left liberal mushhead community, into fighting to cut the Social Security payroll tax, the FICA tax, from 6.2%, which is the normal level, to 4.2%. To do that, allegedly as a stimulus measure, and of course it's a trivial measure, what it does is this alleged $40 per paycheck per family, which doesn't add up to a recovery. But what it does do is to destroy Social Security in the medium to long run. In other words, there's some future Democrat, some fascist Republican or Wall Street Democrat will be able to come forward and say, look, the Social Security Trust Fund is now bankrupt. And we can thank Obama. Obama did this for his own political demagogic needs, for his own reelection, and he's successfully conned the entire progressive coalition into demanding a step towards the demolition of the main fruit of the New Deal and the signature conquest of Franklin D. Roosevelt, the Social Security Act of 1935. So, remember, on the way to this, the Democrats had started off with a completely demagogic position. It would have been fine to do, but they never meant it. That they wanted to tax millionaires. All right, tax the rich. Again, I think taxing the rich is okay as far as it goes. There is an inequity. The top rates, in particular, the top marginal rates, might well go back to 60, 70%, where they were for many decades when the U.S. was faring much better. But the money involved in this is not enough to do anything serious. If you want to get the money, you've got to tax Wall Street turnover. You must have the Wall Street sales tax, the Tobin tax, the Euro Tobin for Europe, the Robin Hood tax, the financial transfer tax, the trading tax, whatever you want to call it. You've got to start carving 1% out of all of those microsecond trades, the flash trading, program trading, high-frequency trading, and all the rest of that. So this obviously is nowhere for the Democratic Party, right? The AFL-CIO was for it. The nurses' union were for it. It was the only issue that came out in a certain way from Occupy Wall Street was the idea of a trading tax. The trading tax was the issue on which the reactionary Tory Cameron decided to break from the European Union, and it would be high time for the European Union to slap on that trading tax. Where is it? And, of course, we want to have something that doesn't require an electron microscope to see it, not 0.00001. But how about a 1 before the comma, as they say, a 1 before the decimal point? So this is the achievement of Obama. Now, in terms of this Keystone XL pipeline, it's clear, right? The elitists, the Big Sur Brigade, the Friends of the Earth, and all the rest of it, right? The radical environmentalists, the radical ecologists, they're against it. Well, they're against everything. We're told that there are 625,000 miles of pipeline in the United States, enough to go around the world 25 times. So somehow this pipeline, in a country that's already crisscrossed by pipelines that are much older, that might benefit from being rebuilt, somehow this is now the end of the world if this goes across an aquifer. I don't see it. Remember, one of the big features of World War II was something called the Big Inch. The Big Inch was a natural gas pipeline from the southern states up into northeast, into the New York and Philadelphia area, which was a key part of the war effort in World War II, so that you wouldn't have to have all of that natural gas going on tankers, because those were subjected to submarine warfare attacks, right, by the German Navy. So those were getting sunk. So they built the Big Inch. This is one of the achievements of the late New Deal. This is Roosevelt during World War II building this pipeline. It couldn't happen today. So what it shows, of course, what Obama wanted to do was to not decide, because if he's against it, he's offending the unions, and I would tend to go with the unions. And if he's for it, then he's going to offend the various green, ultra-ecologist, elitist groups, the Canoe Federation, and all the rest of them. So any kind of production, I think, in this terrible situation, any kind of production would have to be welcome. Build this thing. What is the big deal? Now we're going into the Iowa caucuses. I think the principal problems here are the fact that the Republican Party is a death cult. I guess that's the starting point. The Republican Party talks about nothing but war. They talk about assassination, and they're pushing genocidal austerity across the board. Let's get into it in the remaining 2 segments. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We've got now one of the new honchos, right? One of the new internet savvy, you know the drill, internet savvy, Twitter-oriented, anti-corruption fighters. It's Alexei Navalny, who promises 1 million people in the streets of Moscow. He's an anti-corruption blogger. Well, it is, I think, essentially Putin or chaos. And if you want to you want to hitch your wagon to the adventurer and demagogue Navalny, then go ahead. But let's see if he gets 1 million people tomorrow on the 24th. He's a 35-year-old lawyer, the voice of the opposition, and he accuses Putin of stealing votes, and that Putin will be gone in 2 years, says Navalny. Well. Let's see whether Navalny is able to prevail. But now back to the United States. Concerning Ron Paul's economic program, it seems to me this is the side of this entire thing, the entire Iowa caucus, which has not been sufficiently discussed. Now, they say that Ron Paul has a chance of winning the Iowa caucus. I am skeptical about this because of the prevalence of Christian evangelical voters in Iowa. These are the people who they voted in Pat Robertson in 1988, and they're still there. They voted in Huckabee last time around because he was an evangelical preacher. Now, the question is, what does Ron Paul offer them? Well, he offers, as he said, the deregulation of marriage so that any church can establish any criteria it wants for marriage, and that will have to be accepted. And that, I'm afraid, means that if you have a church that advocates polygamy, that would have to be accepted. Polyandry would have to be accepted. Sharia law would have to be accepted, including the provision that a woman could be divorced simply by saying, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you. Places like Iraq and Syria had gone way beyond that. In other words, that was no longer the case in modern Arab countries, certainly. That had not been maintained. But with Ron Paul, we could have all of that. And the other question, of course, is when he says freedom across the board and then chooses to interpret this as the legalization of prostitution, the legalization of heroin, the legalization of marijuana, and presumably of other currently banned substances. He doesn't believe in the war on drugs. I'm afraid I think a war on drugs is necessary. The war should be conducted in two places. One is that Wall Street launders the money. Well, we can take it the other way around. The CIA runs drugs. That's where the drugs come from. We have the Gary Webb and the crack cocaine epidemic and my own work on Bush the Elder with Iran-Contra. The CIA runs drugs and Wall Street launders the money. That is the locus of the war on drugs that I would recommend. Ron Paul, no, that can't be done. So essentially Ron Paul on this would converge with Soros and the other people who want the full legalization of drugs. So I don't see Ron Paul getting a large share of the evangelical vote when he wants the deregulation of marriage with no legal definition of it, but whatever you want. Do it yourself. Liberty turns into license. And the prostitution, heroin, and marijuana. I think these are incompatible with any family values or social conservative approach. This is essentially the libertine doctrine of somebody like Jeremy Bentham, I guess, is probably the person who would come to mind for the kind of stuff that Ron Paul's talking about. Or the Mandeville fable of the bees, right? How a private vice could turn into a public virtue. Well, I'm afraid private vices do not turn into public virtues. Let's look at his budget, though, because I think this is the thing that needs to be analyzed more, and I'm urging people to join in this effort. Right? Pay attention to the budget that Ron Paul put out at the middle of October, I believe. It's to cut $1 trillion, $1,000 billion out of the U.S. federal budget in 1 year. As I've mentioned in previous broadcasts, it's to cut about 450,000 jobs out of the federal government with, obviously, a meat-axe approach. If you take $1 trillion out of the U.S. federal budget, you are doing an austerity job which is 4 times more severe than what was done in Germany by Brüning between 1930 and 1932, which is probably the most severe austerity in a large country in recent times, in recent world history. So this, I think, it gives us